Welcome, dear dreamer. Take a slow, deep breath in, and now let it gently drift out. You're safe here, in this quiet space between waking and sleep. Let the world outside grow softer, dimmer, quieter. Tonight, we drift back in time. Back to the windswept dunes of Kitty Hawk. To a small, canvas-winged contraption resting in the sand. And to two quiet brothers. Men of patience, precision, and persistence, who would one day lift humanity into the skies. But for now, there is only the hush of waves in the distance, and the soft shush of the wind brushing through the tall grass. Let us begin our peaceful journey. The year is 1903, and the world still belongs to the ground, but not for long. Long before the roar of engines or the thunder of jets, there were two curious boys in Dayton, Ohio. Wilbur, the elder brother, thoughtful, bookish, precise, and Orville the younger, inventive, playful, and full of energy. They were inseparable, but in imagination. Their home was filled with the ticking of clocks, the hum of tools, and stacks of newspapers. Their father, a bishop, often brought home gifts from his travels. One day, he handed them a small toy, a flying top powered by a rubber band. The toy fluttered into the air, and something awakened in the boys. They would never stop wondering how to fly. As they grew older, the brothers' minds turned more and more to the sky. They read about gliders, about German inventors, about brave men who had tried and failed. They studied birds, especially how birds tilted their wings to turn and glide, how they caught the breeze and let it carry them higher without force, without fear. It wasn't just a dream. It became a problem to solve, like a puzzle in the wind. So they began to build. In their small bicycle shop in Dayton, gears and chains gave way to blueprints. Blueprints gave way to wooden frames, and wood gave way to cloth-covered wings. Every detail mattered. Every failure was a quiet step forward. But to truly fly, they needed the wind. So they traveled to a place called Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, a lonely stretch of dunes and seagrass, where the wind howled constantly and the sky stretched endlessly overhead. It was quiet there, peaceful, far from cities and noise, perfect for dreaming. They built their camp from scratch, lived simply, ate beans and biscuits, slept in canvas tents, and each day they tested. Their gliders leapt from dunes, gliding, floating, failing, and slowly improving. The brothers were not just dreamers. They were scientists. They tested wing shapes in homemade wind tunnels, measured lift and drag with their own instruments, wrote down every result, and refined every curve of their strange, beautiful machine. The final design had wings made of spruce and muslin, a small, light engine, and a pair of propellers they carved by hand. They called it the Flyer. It looked like a giant kite, delicate, almost too fragile to touch, but it held the weight of centuries of human longing. And they believed it would fly. The sun rose slowly over the dunes. The sky was soft pale. A cold wind blew steadily from the north. It was December 17, 1903. A few locals stood nearby, bundled in coats, watching with curiosity. Wilbur and Orville flipped a coin. Orville would fly first. He climbed onto the Flyer, laid flat on his stomach, gripped the controls. The engine sputtered to life. The propellers spun. And at 10:35 a.m., the Flyer crept forward, then rose gently, shakily, into the air. Just 12 seconds. Just 120 feet, but enough to change the world. They flew 4 times that day, each flight a little longer, a little steadier, the longest 59 seconds. It doesn't sound like much, but in those seconds, humanity left the ground by its own power for the first time. The world didn't change all at once. There were no crowds, no headlines, just a quiet wind across the sand and 2 brothers shaking hands. But the sky would never again be closed. When they returned to Dayton, there were no parades, no fanfare. The world wasn't quite ready to believe, so the brothers kept working. Each new version of the flyer flew farther, higher, more gracefully. They flew in open fields, to curious cows and birds. They wrote letters to the military, to scientists, to skeptics. Still, no one came, but they didn't mind. They weren't flying for fame. They were flying for wonder. It took years, but eventually, the world noticed. In France, the Wright brothers performed their flights before amazed crowds. They soared over fields and towns, and suddenly, everyone wanted to fly. Airplanes were no longer dreams. They were real, and the brothers, once thought odd and obsessive, became heroes. But still, they remained humble. They returned to Dayton, to their simple lives, to their quiet routines, and they never stopped flying. And now, dear listener, let your thoughts float gently like that first fragile flyer. Imagine the soft hiss of wind through dunes, the distant sound of waves, the sun rising slowly, and 2 quiet figures bent over blueprints in the sand. Their work was patient, their journey long, their success soft as a whisper. Close your eyes, let your breath settle, and dream of flight, not loud or fast, but calm, weightless, and free, just as the Wright brothers imagined. Good night, and sweet dreams.